Well, good morning, Northview. How you doing this morning? It is good to see you. It's good to be joining everybody who's with us online today as well. We are going to wrap up today our series called Masterclass. You thought we were going to wrap it up at Easter or right before Easter, but actually no, there's one more lesson from the upper room that we're going to hit in John chapter 20. But before we get to that, I just want to reiterate what Sean was saying about this coming week and weekend. Big stuff, guys. I mean, we've been praying and planning, and generosity has been given, and I mean, it's working. It has been a 2-year journey on just the construction side. You back it up a couple years before that on the planning and preparation side, but this week is going to be a special week. I can't wait for tomorrow night for the dedication service. We're going to take some cues from the book of Nehemiah when they went through dedicating the wall to kind of bring into our dedication service tomorrow night, and then next weekend is just going to be a ton of fun. Just an absolute ton of fun. There's invites as you go out our double doors just in stacks. So be sure to grab a big hunk of those and help us get the word out. If you own a place of business, take a whole bunch with you and just set it on your counter. Just whatever you can do to help us get the word out, that'll be appreciated. It's going to be an awesome week. But in John 20, which is where we're going to be today, remember last week, Easter, empty tomb thing, right? Jesus is alive. You remember that part? Yeah. Okay, we're there. Okay, that's the running start on today. Okay, you're there. All right, so Jesus is first discovered by Mary, first discovered by some other women, then discovered by a couple disciples, then a couple on the road to Emmaus have this encounter with Jesus. They realize it's him. They go running 6 miles back to tell the disciples that he's there. At the end of the evening, he has this moment where he appears to all of the disciples in one place, and so each one of these groups of people has this opportunity to see Jesus with their own eyes, come to the same conclusion. Wow, he's alive. It's improbable, it's unbelievable, but it's right here in front of me. They just had to see it for themselves to believe it. They had watched him die just a couple days before and had wished and hoped and pleaded with God, just stop this whole thing. Just make it all stop. Jesus, they've seen him do all these miracles, heal all these people. Couldn't he just make it stop and come down off of that cross? They watched this, thought this, were tormented by this, but Jesus knew something that they didn't know. He knew that there would be something even more powerful than just making it all stop and coming down from the cross. He knew that it would be even more powerful if he came up from the grave. And so he laid his life down willingly so that he could prove or give this sign undeniably to people for generations to come that he was alive. He knew it would be more powerful to come up from the grave than down from the cross, that it would take an epic sign to prove that he was the God of the universe. And so he did it. He demonstrated it, but it was so improbable, so impossible that people had to see it with their own eyes to be able to believe it. And many who heard about his resurrection, contrary to what some of those messengers might have thought, they did not react with great joy. When people were going around and saying Jesus was alive, there were a lot of people who didn't celebrate. They reacted the way you would react if someone told you that someone else came back from the dead. I don't know that your first reaction would be joy. It would probably be a whole heaping spoonful of doubt added with a couple more spoonfuls of skepticism. And that's what they were up against. And that was what the reality was. That was just normal. And one of those guys was Thomas. One was from within their own circle of Jesus' closest followers. He was, for whatever reason, and we don't know why, he was not there when Jesus stopped in to say, hey, on Easter Sunday. Like in the history of just missing people, like this is an all-timer. An absolute all-timer, right? I mean, like if you were to go home today and somebody was there at your house, maybe your kids or your spouse or your friends, and you come through the door and they're like, oh, hey, you just missed it. The president was here. Yeah, he just wanted a PB&J. He was a little hungry, Like he just swung through. He was on the way, and he just, man, I can't believe you missed it. Or if you showed up at your house and the same group of friends said, dude, you're never going to believe this, but we were just out back just kind of shooting hoops and Michael Jordan pulled up. I mean, MJ, his airness, like we just played a quick game of 21. Like, can you believe it? I mean, what your reaction would not be joy. It would be frustration. It would be desperate. You'd be like, what? What? And that was Thomas, and I don't know why he missed it. I don't know if he was out on a grocery run. I don't know if he was devastated. It would make sense if he was. You know, not everybody reacts with grief in the same way. Some people do like community in moments of just agony. They want to be with each other and time together. Other people are like, dude, give me space. I don't want to be around people right now. I just got to get away. Maybe that's what he was doing. We don't know, but he was not there. And so when he hears, we saw Jesus, he says, nah, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. And so he sits in this for a week. So here we are. We celebrated Easter last week. This is the exact same timeline that Thomas had been waiting and thinking and processing. And here we are a week later. Some have said Jesus is alive. Thomas has said, I'm not going to buy it. I'm not going to believe it. In fact, he says in John 20, verse 24, he records that Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with him when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we've seen the Lord. But he said, unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of his nails, and place my hand in his side, I will never believe. Never believe. Now, Thomas is commonly called Doubting Thomas because of this episode. But if I could, I would love to do just a little bit of character rebuilding on this poor guy. All right? Because I don't think Doubting Thomas is doing anything much different than what you or I would do. And I also think that the term Doubting Thomas overlooks some characteristics that have already been displayed in the Gospels that really show his heart to be 100% aligned with Jesus. John 11 is one of the most dramatic. John 11 is the story where Lazarus has died. Jesus is going to go raise him from the dead. In fact, it was the raising of Lazarus that puts the timer to the ticking bomb that was the crucifixion. As soon as Jesus called Lazarus out of that tomb, it ensured that he would walk into one. Because that sign was so outlandish, so incredible, the Jewish leaders said, we got to get him out of here after that. But it was on their way to go heal Lazarus that Jesus is speaking to the disciples, and he's telling them a little bit about his plan, and they don't understand it, they don't grab it. But it's in the midst of that conversation that Thomas thinks what Jesus is saying is that what Lazarus did was noble, and it's better that this happened, and so God's going to do something powerful here. And Thomas volunteers, well, then let's go, and we'll go die with him. So the guy does not lack devotion. He does not lack courage. He does not lack for love or passion for Jesus. What he lacks is evidence. He lacks that there's evidence to prove that this is actually really happening. His doubt is very straightforward. To Thomas, Jesus' resurrection was unexplainable. Simple as that. Simple as that. He's not buying all the craziness and all this stuff that people are reporting. To him, stuff like that can't happen. It's 10 out of 10. 10 people die, 10 people stay dead. That's the way this works. There isn't anything other than that for him. Very, very straightforward. This is the bottom line. Dead people don't come back to life. I have people ask me sometimes, my wife will ask me sometimes, and I have to just resist every time the conversation that I want to have. I'm going to tell you a little confessional after a funeral. How'd the funeral go? And I'll say in my head, not good. I don't know not good. Not alive. Still dead. Not good. I know what they mean, and I know the heart behind the conversation. But 10 out of 10, 100 out of 100, every time, it ends the same way. They stay dead. Thomas had to wrestle with the fact that people he trusted. I mean, he trusted with his life. He left everything to be with these guys and did life with them for 3 years. He has to wrestle with the fact that these guys who he knows are not crazy people are saying, we saw him. We were with him. He talked with us. We were there. It was real. It actually happened. Here's, I think, a key to understanding how this is different for them and for him. And this maybe is helpful to understand sometimes how we doubt and why we doubt, and how we also establish our beliefs. We don't always establish beliefs in a categorical way. Sometimes things are very personal, and you can see this represented in these two groups. To the disciples and the women and those Jesus has appeared to, this belief and conviction about the resurrection is deeply personal. To Thomas, it's just a category. It's a category. People who die stay dead. Right? And a lot of times our beliefs are a combination that we have in life. Our convictions that we have in life are a combination of category and personal experience. Like for example, when I was in my 20s, marriage was a category to me. It was just a category. There was no specific person who I was eyeing or in relationship with. Marriage was a category, and there were reasons not to get married in my mind. I'm too young. I don't have any money. There's a lot of choices out there. Right? You got all these reasons. Marriage is a category. Then I met Jamie. And then my conversation in my mind about marriage was no longer categorical. It was personal. All the same issues were there. I'm too young. I don't have any money. There's a lot of other people out there. Those were all still there. But my conviction grew in light of a person, right? It became deeply personal to me. And so those other objections, those other things that I was concerned about started to kind of be less in my mind, because somebody who I was in love with. It's the same way with God. People don't become Christians because they have every single question or objection or argument about God answered for them. It's almost always because something deeply personal happens in their life. They still have questions, but something undeniable, deeply personal happens, and it shrinks the previously held objections to faith. Faith becomes personal, and this changes everything. It certainly did for Thomas. Look at verse 26. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. And although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Some translations will say, "Stop doubting and believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." And Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." This is the last lesson from the upper room. And in many ways, I think Jesus saved his best for last. It's a message and a lesson that was directly for Thomas. But the spillover teaching was something that every follower, every disciple for the rest of time would be able to glean from. Some things can be real, even if they are not explainable. To Thomas, Jesus' resurrection was unexplainable until he personally encountered the undeniable. And it was that undeniable presence of Jesus that moved him from a place of doubt to a place of faith. He couldn't explain it, but he couldn't deny that he's sitting right here in front of me. Some things in life are just flat out unexplainable, yet their existence is undeniable. Here's one of my favorite examples of it. Yale professor emeritus Robert Adair wrote a book several years ago called The Physics of Baseball. the physics of baseball. And he breaks down all kinds of different things in baseball and how physics come into play. And one of the most fascinating examples is pitching. And he uses this example of a 90-mile-an-hour fastball and all the physics related to a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. And he says it takes 400 milliseconds for a fastball to go 60 feet, 6 inches at 90 miles an hour. 400 milliseconds. Now, for a batter, here's what that translates to. There's a processing that has to go on. There's a movement towards the ball with a bat that has to go on, a swing that has to hit at precisely the right time. He's broken all that down in this calculation. He says it takes 400 milliseconds for the pitch to go 60 feet, 6 inches. The recognition, he says, takes 200 milliseconds to decide, yes or no, I'm going to swing or I'm not going to swing. And then on top of that, he says it takes 100 milliseconds to begin to place the bat high, low, middle, wherever the bat needs to go, and 150 milliseconds to complete that swing. So if you're doing the math, 400 milliseconds is what it takes for the ball to travel 60 feet, 6 inches. 450 milliseconds is what he says it takes to see it, process it, and swing. If I could quote him directly, he says, when a big league pitcher throws a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, a batter has less than a quarter second to see the pitch, judge its speed and location, decide what to do, and then start to swing. The bat must meet the ball within an eighth of an inch of dead center at precisely the right millisecond as the 3-inch spinning sphere whizzes by. Here's his conclusion, Mr. Physicist here. It is a superhuman feat that is clearly impossible. That is a scientific analysis that is fatally flawed by the eye test. Because we see people do it every single day. Every single day in Major League Baseball. In fact, faster than a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. There are guys touching speeds over 100 miles an hour now, with the fastest speed being clocked in the major leagues at around 105 miles an hour. I don't have the calculations for that, but I imagine it's somewhere between just close your eyes, swing hard, hope you get lucky. It is a superhuman feat that is clearly impossible. Science says it's not possible. The eye test says, oh yeah, it's real. You can hit a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. It is possible to do it. Science says no. The resurrection, the eye test says yes. Now, one of the things about science that I think we can all appreciate is that if there's any such thing as infallible proof, it's that the repetition of a same experiment creates the similar result. So, one of the things that Thomas becomes is one of a number of similar experiences, eyewitnesses who have seen Jesus. I mean, you could say it this way. Mary Magdalene encountered him first. That's experiment 1. 2 on the way. We could go with others, but I'll just skip to 2 on the way to Emmaus. Experiment 2. Peter encounters him. Experiment 3. The other disciples encounter him. Experiment 4. 500 people see him at one time, according to 1 Corinthians 15. That's experiment 5. James, Jesus' half-brother, sees him. Experiment 6. Paul sees him. Experiment 7. Thomas sees him. Experiment 8. Each one of these is a repetition of the same experiment. They all encountered the same undeniable, incredible thing. I don't know what's more impressive in some regards to Thomas with this whole encounter. I'm sure it is mostly that Jesus is here physically and that he gets to see with his own eyes what everybody else has seen. That this moment becomes his moment. Not everybody else's moment, but his moment. And that's an important detail when it relates to faith. Faith in Jesus is something that you can't exercise for somebody else and they can't exercise for you. It's about your time. It's about your moment. It's about your response. Thomas has this opportunity to respond because he sees Jesus right in front of him. But not only does Jesus acknowledge to him that he's alive, did you notice that he also acknowledged his specific doubts? I mean, that conversation that he had about unless I put my finger in his hands, his fingers in his side, I'm not going to believe it. Jesus wasn't physically in the room when he said that. I mean, who relayed that? Nobody else had seen Jesus since then. But the first words out of his mouth were, Thomas, hey, let me address those doubts. What I'm saying is Jesus was there in the midst of those doubts. As Thomas was voicing that, whether audibly or even just in his mind, he was there. He heard it, and he came to meet him in the place where those doubts existed. He does it for you and I as well. I think one of the things with doubt that you and I don't like is that doubt creates tension in faith. We'd love for faith to not have tension. We'd love for those to get smoothed out. How many of you have prayed that prayer? God, if you're real, move that picture on the wall. Move that stick. Make that rain go away. Clear up this problem. God, if you're real, heal this. Right? We do this. And a lot of times there's a crisis or a tension that's there in our faith, and we're not comfortable with it at all. It's apparent that God is plenty comfortable with a little bit of tension in our faith, and that he actually uses that tension to be a means and a grounds by which he meets us, connects with us. I don't know why he does it that way. I guess it's because he's God and I'm not. He sees a bigger picture. I don't know why. But some of you are struggling with doubt, not because God isn't demonstrating his presence, but because you are trying to put him on your terms. And it's only your terms that are going to be the terms that you're going to be convinced by. God doesn't operate on your terms. But in this moment, he met Thomas where he was. And the proof of the resurrection was so powerful that it transformed him immediately. From somebody who was a skeptic, hesitant, resistant, even almost angry about who God was and his presence in the lives of his friends, to someone who was a full-on, fully devoted follower. He was changed in an instant. I can appreciate this. I feel like my own personal journey was this way. Raised in church, wrestled with doubts in my teenage years, kind of put on a quiet, peaceful, mostly front, went to church with mom and dad, but inside there was a lot of turmoil going on. And it was a book that I read in a season of doubt called The Case for Christ that played a pivotal role in my understanding of the historicity and the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. The book was written by a guy who was a former atheist. His wife had become a Christian. He was a Chicago Tribune journalist. And his wife started going to church, which he said, okay, fine, you can go to church. And then she said, I want to start giving to the church. And he said, no, not happening. And so that's what prompted him, her desire to be generous, prompted him to turn his investigative skills as a journalist loose and prove to her, no, we're not going to give money to this church because the whole thing is a farce. And so he let the evidence take him where the evidence would go, assuming it would take him to a place where he could say, see, honey, this is stupid. And he followed the evidence to where it went. And the evidence demanded, as Joshua McDowell would say, a verdict. And his life was forever changed. And he wrote this book called Case for Christ. I read that as a 17-year-old. And on the other side of it, it was a lot like Thomas for me. The evidence around me had always been there. In a lot of ways, nothing had changed, but something deeply personal clicked. It clicked, and it changed. And here's what I found in my own doubt journey. Like Thomas, I learned that faith grows when you allow the undeniable to overshadow the unexplainable. When you just embrace that there's a lot of things that you won't fully, probably ever understand, but there is enough to undeniably say there is a God. And he is a God of love. And he wants relationship with me. Sometimes the demand to see something is not doubt the way we think of, doubting Thomas. It was actually love and devotion. I think what was pent up with Thomas is that he was an all or nothing guy. And he wasn't messing around. And whatever he was going to do to the fullest. And so when Jesus shows him, it's me. Did you catch his reaction? He says, my Lord and my God. There's no one who made a revelation, a self-declaration about Jesus stronger than what Thomas made. Not in the whole Gospels, my Lord and my God, than what he made in that moment. So we can call him Doubting Thomas all we want. Not even Peter, who said, you're the Christ, you're the Son of the living God. I mean, Thomas said, my Lord, my God. You got me. It's all in. All the chips in the table. Transformed, changed, revolutionized by the experience that he had in that moment. Nobody offered the same devotion, the same commitment to Jesus. Thomas held out. He held out until he saw Jesus with his own eyes. But once he saw him, he was never the same. When you allow the undeniable to overshadow the unexplainable, here's what happens with your faith. It becomes an unstoppable reality because you've seen too much to be able to walk away. You've seen that there's enough demonstrated proof. On my dark days, when I want to quit, because sometimes life is hard. Life is hard. Following Jesus is hard. Holding on to faith is hard. But I see too much. I go outside every day and I look at this world that we're living in and I go, if not God, then how? I look at these eyewitnesses of the empty tomb and I go, if he can do that, then he can change anything. And I have these kind of anchors to go by that are undeniable proofs of how God has moved in history. A lot of times I look forward and I go, God, I don't know how you're going to look. I don't know how you're going to move from here to there where we're going. And I forget to look backward and be able to undeniably see what God has already done. The testimony and the legacy and the proof that he's there. Thomas's faith became unstoppable from this moment. And one of the things that most people don't know about him is that for all the grief we give him about being Doubting Thomas, he actually took the gospel further than anybody. Church history credits him with taking the gospel to India, 2,500 miles from where he is in this moment where he says, unless I put my fingers in his hands, I'll never believe. He took the gospel further than anybody from this moment forward. I told you, it wasn't the kind of doubt that was, this non-engaged doubt. He was all in. He just needed to be sure. He just needed to be sure. In fact, right before he died, and he died because of his faith, he was asked to deny Christ. And this one-time doubter famously said, I will never, ever renounce Christ. Never, ever. He's seen too much. Jesus has become too real, too personal. God has an unstoppable life of faith for all who will believe. This isn't just an invitation for guys like Thomas. It's an invitation for you. And so this is a moment that God has reserved in history for you to respond. And here's the thing about the resurrection. The evidence isn't deficient. That's not why people don't respond to Jesus. It's not because the evidence is deficient. It's because the evidence is demanding. It calls you to something. It doesn't let you just go home and kick up your feet and watch a baseball game. It calls you, like it did to Thomas, to throw everything down and say, my Lord and my God, if you have come back from the dead, you are the most important reality in the world. Everything else is pales in comparison to you. It calls you to let some stuff go, to drop it all and to follow Jesus wholeheartedly. That's what I'm inviting you to do today. To let that empty tomb speak and to let that conviction overcome any of the doubts that you may have. Some of you are going, it just seems impossible. Well, if I could use baseball again as an illustration, how are people hitting these fastballs that a physicist says cannot be hit? All right, the answer to the question is they start the swing before they decide if they're going to go through with it. You have to. You have to go ahead and get in the box, and you have to assume that that pitch is coming in right where you want it, and you load and you start to move towards the ball, already moving yourself in the direction of the swing. You have a moment where you can pull that back, but you have to start going towards the ball or you'll never get around on it in time. For you who are maybe struggling with doubt, can I encourage you to start the swing? Just to begin to get yourself pushed into that motion, maybe just by examining the intricacies of the world that we live in. Asking some questions about your existence. How did I get here? How is the physiology of my body even happening right now? How is this world being held together? How are we so perfectly able to navigate through the complexities of a universe on planet Earth when other places in our galaxies could never have life exist? Begin to start the swing and invite Jesus to make himself personally known to you. If you're ready to take that step, I would invite you as we sing these next songs just to meet me in the back. I'd love to pray with you and talk with you, help you take that next step. You can respond via the code on the screen. But let's, like Thomas, lay everything down in light of the evidence of the resurrection, in light of the proof of God's love for us. Let's throw it all down and declare with everything we are, you're my Lord and my God. I'll go wherever you call me. Will you stand with me? Will you pray? Heavenly Father, we thank you for the patience that you have to walk with us and work with us and take us on a journey of faith. That even in the moments when our faith is feeble and fragile and we don't know where to go or what to do, that you hear us, that you walk beside us, and that you meet us right where we are. God, we lay this time in your hands. And we ask for you to move in our hearts, to firm our feet in steps of faith, to establish an unshakable, unstoppable faith in you. We love you, God, and it's in your name that we pray. Amen.